General Hospital spoilers tease that Jason Morgan has faced countless dangers, survived hundreds of assassination attempts, and lived through situations that an ordinary person could never even imagine. Yet nothing had ever unsettled him, had ever made him feel so off balance and anxious, as that unexpected phone call. The call rang out in a deadly silence, at a time when Jason thought the chaos from the nurse's ball had finally subsided. But it turned out to be only a deceptive calm before a new storm, one heralded by an unfamiliar voice from the other end of the line. No name. No address. No specific demands. Just a chilling warning and a name whispered in the darkness, the name of the person behind the attack on Sunny's penthouse. Someone who had once hidden behind masterful disguises. Long believed to be forgotten, had now resurfaced like a ghost rising from hell. That call shook the very foundations of trust Jason had built around him, reviving buried suspicions and long-forgotten memories with terrifying intensity. What disturbed him wasn't just the name that had been revealed, but the way it was delivered, slow, steady, cold, and commanding, as if implying that Jason had no choice but to walk into the nightmare. This wasn't merely a clue. It was an unspoken order from an invisible force, something orchestrating the story from the shadows. Whoever made the call knew one thing: Jason would never ignore a threat to Sunny. The message was crafted to manipulate his psyche, to control him through fear and obligation. He couldn't sit still, couldn't wait, couldn't let this fall into the enemy's hands. If he didn't act, if he didn't uncover the buried truth, not only Sunny but everyone connected to them could become the next targets in this deadly game. An obsession began to creep into Jason's every move, every thought, turning everything around him into an unsolvable riddle. Someone he once trusted, could they be the traitor? A former ally, could they be under someone else's control? And even himself, was he just a pawn in a grander scheme he couldn't yet see? The questions echoed like a chorus of darkness refusing to stay silent. Jason sensed something moving behind the curtain of truth. Not just a scheme, but a madness long in the making. Quiet. Calculated, and now erupting just as everyone's guard was down. The phone call wasn't merely a warning. It was the beginning of a journey Jason was now forced to see through to the end, no matter the danger, no matter the cost. It triggered a chain reaction that made Jason realize Port Charles had never truly been safe. A hidden hand was reshaping the balance of power. What he knew was only the tip of the iceberg. And the call was a threatening invitation into the depths, where the darkest secrets, cruelest conspiracies, and most horrifying truths were waiting to surface. And once Jason stepped through that door, there was no turning back. He would have no choice but to face everything that call had awakened, a new obsession, deeper, scarier, and more unhinged than anything he had ever known. The call Jason received wasn't just a disruption in his already dangerous life, it was a wake-up call. A veiled threat disguised within the stillness of sound and the deliberate distortion of a voice. The mysterious woman on the other end gave away nothing of her true identity. Instead, she used a voice-altering device, rendering her tone strange, emotionless, and warped, as if it came from another dimension, from a place where truth and lies no longer had a clear boundary. There was no fear, no pleading, no overt threat, just a chill running through every word, every syllable, as though her voice was created solely to instill doubt and chaos in Jason's mind. The choice to distort her voice wasn't just to hide her identity, it was a psychological tactic, forcing Jason to speculate, to search, and in doing so, pulling him deeper into a labyrinth of untold events. The inhuman coldness in her tone triggered a sense of urgency in Jason. This wasn't just a warning, it was a summons. A calculated coercion that stripped him of the option to walk away. Everything had been designed to push him into action. To pull him out of his comfort zone and make him face something yet unnamed, a new obsession quietly erupting within Port Charles, starting with him. Jason knew these kinds of psychological games all too well. He had seen enemies use voices to torture prisoners, sounds to manipulate emotions, and silence to spread fear. But never before had a single phone call felt this heavy. This woman, or perhaps the group behind her, was launching a cruel game that Jason had no choice but to join. What she revealed wasn't clear or detailed, but it was enough to ignite a terrifying string of suspicions in Jason's mind. The one behind Sunny's attack wasn't a stranger. On the contrary, it was a name Jason had heard before, had met, had once trusted, or dismissed as an insignificant threat. That was what made this call so dangerously insane. It didn't just deliver information. It challenged Jason's entire system of reasoning and instinct, plunging him into utter uncertainty. In that moment, Jason was no longer just the receiver of the call. He became the centerpiece of a new, deranged shift, where all concepts of friend and foe, trust and betrayal, truth and lies were turned upside down. He knew that once he began this investigation, he wouldn't be able to stop until he found the one responsible, even if the cost was his life, his loyalties, or the last fragile piece he had left. That phone call didn't just change the playing field, it was redrawing the entire map of Port Charles's underworld, where every relationship could be exploited. And every familiar face could hide a deadly secret. Jason said nothing to Carly. He wasn't certain of anything yet, and he knew Carly wouldn't accept him taking a risk without something concrete. He didn't confide in Dante either, because if this investigation involved people within law enforcement, secrecy was critical. Sunny, meanwhile, was reeling from the constant attacks. And Jason knew his friend was now doubting everything, including those closest to him. The call made it clear, time was no longer on their side. The enemy had already moved, and this time, they weren't just trying to kill Sunny. They wanted to destroy everything Sunny and Jason had built, loyalty, honor, and trust. And that's why Jason had to investigate, not just to uncover the truth, but to prevent something even worse, the total collapse of a system that had once been the backbone of Port Charles's underworld. This investigation had no map. No clear starting point, only a distorted voice and a cryptic message echoing endlessly in Jason's mind. It drove him to stay awake, stay alert, keep questioning. Everything was heating up, by the hour, the minute, the second. And Jason knew that if he didn't act fast, everything would go up in flames, not just Sunny's life, but the survival of everything they had ever fought to protect. Not long after receiving the mysterious, haunting phone call with a distorted voice that was unrecognizable, Jason decided to head to Los Angeles once again. His instincts told him that the answer didn't lie in the silence of Port Charles, but at the very place where the call originated, a place that had buried many painful memories and was also the starting point for a chain of events slowly spiraling out of control. In Jason's mind, the puzzle pieces began to fall into place, the fragmented details in that strange voice, the half-truths, and especially the vague but persistent feeling that someone he once knew, someone he had trusted, was behind it all. This trip was no longer just an investigation, it was a confrontation with the past, with what he thought was long over but was actually lying dormant, waiting to rise again. When Jason arrived at the hospital in LA, it didn't take him long to realize that the situation was far more serious than he had anticipated. One of the doctors here, who had appeared briefly in old files he'd investigated, now emerged as a key link, Britt. Once someone Jason had known during a chaotic time in his life, Britt now had a new life. A professional identity at a major hospital where she was regarded as a trusted physician. But what Jason uncovered behind this facade were even more shocking new pieces of evidence, concealed documents, missing patient files with no explanation, and surgeries directly linked to names in the underworld of Port Charles. Each discovery was a new blow, another distorted piece of the truth, just like the voice in the call that had led him here. Jason knew Britt had always been a complicated person, intelligent, sharp, but also mysterious and vulnerable. She had made mistakes, partnered with untrustworthy individuals. But Jason had never imagined she could be behind such a large-scale conspiracy. Yet, every trace was pointing toward her, and that left Jason with no choice but to confront the truth. He began to ask himself, was Britt truly the one who made that call? Or was she just holding the key, accidentally dragged into a dangerous spiral she couldn't control? But if she were the mastermind, if she had planned this step by step, then this was not just a betrayal, it was a real disaster. The truth was, The documents Jason found indicated that Britt had been silently connected to a group involved in underground activities, particularly attacks on key figures in organized crime, including Sonny. There were manipulated medical records, patients whose identities were concealed and transferred in the dead of night, and surgeries where Britt herself was in charge. But the information had been erased from the system just hours after they were completed. Jason realized he was standing in front of something much darker, not just a shadowy figure making phone calls, but a network intertwining medicine, crime, and hidden personal motives concealed beneath the cloak of ethics and professionalism. Each new piece of evidence brought him closer to the abyss. He couldn't fathom what had driven Britt to go this deep. Was it power? Revenge? Or a promise made to someone else? But one thing was certain, if she was indeed behind it all. The battle ahead would not just be about unraveling a conspiracy, it would be about freeing people who thought they were doing the right thing, but had been trapped in the web of irreparable mistakes. Port Charles was no longer the only place facing danger. In LA, a new series of disasters was quietly unfolding. And Britt, once seen as an ally, a friend, someone Jason had trusted, had now become the epicenter of the storm. Jason couldn't stop. Not when every truth he uncovered brought another familiar name. Another doubt, another knife into the trust that was no longer intact within him. And along this journey, he realized, sometimes, the one you're trying to protect is the one leading you to the edge of the abyss more than anyone else. The journey Jason was now on, from a seemingly simple call with a distorted voice to returning to Los Angeles, quickly transformed into a global nightmare of crime, manipulation, and betrayal. What he thought would be a trip to verify the origin of the call had now become a whirlwind he never saw coming. Everything he knew about her, about loyalty, about the past and the vulnerability he once saw in her eyes, was shattered by a series of new, shocking pieces of evidence from the very place she worked, the hospital in LA. At first, Jason thought Britt might have been holding a piece of important information, perhaps an intermediary or even someone who had been unintentionally dragged into an attack on Sonny. But the reality was completely different. She wasn't just pulled in, she was being controlled, systematically, purposefully, and with careful planning. Hidden files, unlogged surgeries, night transfers of patients, these couldn't have happened without Britt's involvement, or, unless she was being forced to do it. The discrepancies in the medical orders, the selectively erased footage from the hospital, and the disappearance of patients tied to the underground world, all pointed to an undeniable truth that Britt was at the center of a larger and more complex scheme. But what truly shocked Jason wasn't the fact that Britt was being controlled, it was the identity of those behind that control. As Jason followed Britt's trail, another horrifying truth began to emerge, a secret partnership between Sidwell and Sonny. It was an alliance no one had expected, because these two came from completely opposite worlds. One was a powerful crime boss from an organization that had never been fully exposed. And the other was the longtime symbol of power in Port Charles, a man who had always claimed he wanted to step away from the world of violence. Yet, they were working together, in a deal that was unclear, undisclosed, and completely against everything Sonny had told Jason. This made everything crazier than ever before. Jason, who had always believed Sonny was someone he could rely on, now had to face a reality where that trust might have been exploited or, worse, betrayed. He began to ask himself, did Sonny know that Britt was being controlled? Was the agreement between Sonny and Sidwell the reason Britt was being pulled into this game as a pawn? And was everything that was happening truly under anyone's control, or were they all just pawns in a much larger game being played by an even more powerful force pulling the strings from the shadows? Jason was beginning to understand more clearly than ever before that he was fighting a shapeless monster, a criminal system disguised by legal facades, business deals, complex personal relationships, and psychological manipulation so sophisticated that those involved didn't even realize they were being controlled. The fact that Britt had become a doctor at a major hospital in LA was no coincidence, and the fact that Sidwell had approached Sonny wasn't by chance either. Every move, every handshake, every decision that seemed separate was actually part of a well-programmed strategy by someone who knew exactly how to exploit each person's weaknesses, their fear, loyalty, obsession. and desire to protect their loved ones. Jason had no choice but to take the investigation to the highest level. He couldn't simply save Britt without exposing those behind it. He couldn't confront Sidwell without understanding whether the relationship between Sidwell and Sunny was truly a voluntary partnership or just an exchange based on coercion. The only thing Jason knew for sure at this moment was that everything was becoming more insane by the second, at an unstoppable pace. Each passing day, each passing minute, was another web tightening around them, another name that could be pulled in, another nightmare preparing to erupt. And while Jason struggled to keep himself from being swallowed by this chaos, he understood that this was no longer a fight to protect Sunny, to save Britt, or to expose Sidwell. This was a fight for the truth, a truth that had been distorted, torn apart, and scattered. Hiding behind fake handshakes, carefully packaged lies, and unanswered phone calls, Jason had to accept that everything he once trusted was crumbling. And in order to restore balance, if that was even possible, he would have to go all the way. Even if it meant confronting those who were once his friends, unmasking those who were once his allies, and facing the truth that sometimes, those he thought needed saving, were the ones who had chosen the path of destruction from the start. Jason is entering the most dangerous phase of his investigation, a stage where every mystery is gradually being unraveled, and what seemed like vague speculations is turning into brutal, cold, and ruthless truths. In the final days in Los Angeles, after a series of buried clues and threats hidden under the veil of legality, Jason is finally facing what he always knew was inevitable. A direct confrontation with the most dangerous enemy to ever enter his life. No longer are there cryptic words over the phone. No longer are there vague traces on medical records. It is a harsh reality staring him in the face, a force that has quietly manipulated every step, every choice, and even Jason himself, drawing him into a life-or-death game he didn't even realize he had been playing for so long. Facing this enemy is not simply about fighting to win, but accepting the entry into a gray area where ethics, emotions, loyalty, and survival are all traded off. Jason's enemy is not a gunman, not a crime boss sitting behind a power desk, but a mind capable of adjusting obsession, the very thing Jason thought he had buried with the past. This person knows every crack in Jason's psyche, knows exactly who he wants to protect most, and who he is willing to sacrifice everything to save. And this person has chosen wisely, Britt. As Jason tries to maintain his rationality, trying to push away the emotional turmoil and act as a warrior, a new obsessive shift rises within him, the fear of losing the woman he once thought had left his world forever. Britt is not just a person involved in the case. She is the center of everything. And because of that, she is also the most fragile pawn in this deadly game. Every sign that she is being controlled not only worries Jason but also pulls him out of his role as a cold pursuer, forcing him into the position of a man about to lose everything. The obsession with Britt's safety begins to alter every calculation he's made. He no longer counts steps with reason. He starts to take risks, act recklessly, and accept risks he would normally never take. This shift becomes a new explosive adjustment. Jason, who once controlled every situation with sharpness and skill, is now slowly losing control of himself. His decisions begin to be driven by emotions, by images of Britt being trapped, threatened with death, used as bait to lure him. And this is exactly what his enemy has planned. This shift, from reason to emotion, is the goal the enemy has aimed for. They don't want to kill Jason with bullets. They want him to push himself to the edge, to destroy himself with the obsession he cannot escape. Jason knows that if he wants to save Britt, he will have to accept a painful trade-off. It could be someone else's life. It could be a secret that cannot be revealed. It could be Sunny himself. Because this game is no longer about money, power, or status, it is about control. Whoever controls the other's fear will win. And Jason, no matter how strong, cannot deny that Britt is his greatest remaining weakness. In the days to come, the confrontation between Jason and his enemy will no longer be confined by rules. There will be no boundary between right and wrong. Only one brutal truth remains. The one who cannot conquer their own fear will lose. And Jason, now not only the protector of Britt, but the one being pulled into a psychological battle, must find a way to regain control. He must face his obsession, overcome the adjustment that has thrown him off course, and accept that no victory comes without a price. The story has gone beyond a medical conspiracy, a personal investigation, or an old relationship between former allies. It has become a battle between reason and obsession, between the past and the present, between repressed love and survival. And in the eye of the storm, Jason is preparing for a final blow, not just to save Britt, but to save himself from complete collapse. Because once the confrontation begins, there will be no escape. Only the last survivor remains. Britt's return is not just a shocking event for the people of Port Charles, but a massive jolt to the entire story that is becoming increasingly chaotic and dangerous. In a context where everything is being reshaped by invisible hands, and the underground forces are tightening their grip on key players, Britt's reappearance is not simply a part of a medical journey or a coincidence of plot points. It is a new explosive adjustment, a carefully orchestrated shock designed to take the entire story to a new level, where emotions, loyalty, and unresolved pasts will collide in an emotional explosion that cannot be avoided. Britt is returning not as just a doctor, but as the keeper of secrets that could change everything. What she went through in Los Angeles, the years of silence, the threats and manipulation, the decisions she was forced to make under the pressure of an unnamed force, all of it has changed her. Reshaped her into someone different, stronger, but more damaged, with more layers of protection, and carrying a storm inside her that has never truly settled. And that storm, when it collides with Jason's storm, the man she once loved, once lost and still a part of her heart, will create a wave of emotion that is about to surge and break all previous boundaries. Jason, already deep in an obsessive investigation, now faces the woman who was once the greatest source of both comfort and pain in his life. He has never truly forgotten Britt. The memories of her gaze, their conversations full of unspoken meaning, the last time they parted, all of it still there, buried deep beneath the steel exterior of a soldier, a protector. Someone who avoids emotions to focus on the task at hand. But her return, in flesh and blood, with eyes that can read his soul, is cracking that exterior, piece by piece. This is not just the resurrection of an old love, but a confrontation between two people full of wounds, regret, and still in love, but no longer the same people. Jason is now a man lost in the storm of obsession and betrayal. Britt is the woman carrying secrets capable of destroying the system Jason is trying to expose. And when these two face each other, it's not just the longing that rises, it's an explosion of everything that was once suppressed, anger, guilt, doubt, and love that never died. Britt's return is the spark that ignites a new series of obsessions Jason cannot avoid. He must continue investigating and fighting against the most dangerous enemy. But he also has to face himself, with the choice between love and duty, between loyalty to Sunny and responsibility to Britt. Between believing the woman who once left or questioning the reasons for her return. Every moment with her is an inner battle, every look is a silent question. And every decision is a step closer to either collapse or salvation. Port Charles is no longer peaceful. Everything is exploding, secrets uncovered, alliances broken. Memories thought forgotten rising stronger than ever. And at the center of it all, no one else but Jason and Britt, two people who once loved each other in chaos. Now once again pulled back together by fate in a new whirlwind. But this time, there is no room for hesitation. They will either face it all together, or be drowned in the very obsessions, mistakes, and passions they can never let go of.